So the three different views would have a different interpretation of where the tribulation happens. A pre-tribulation view would draw on verses like Romans 5 verse 9, where Christians are spared the wrath. So they're spared the entire 7 years of the tribulation because the elect refers to Israel. Holders of a mid-tribulation view would look at things like Matthew 24:22, where Jesus says it will be cut short for the sake of the elect, would see that there's this sense of the church and believers going through the tribulation and then being raptured somewhere after the midway point, because the elect is being cut short for their sake. Whereas the post-tribulation view is that believers go through the entire tribulation and the wrath of God, and that God gathers them, the elect, together at the final trumpet call at the end, after all the apocalyptic signs that Jesus describes in Matthew 24. Before he gets to verse 31, where he says, then he'll come, that they would look at the events of the tribulation and the events of the end times and see one resurrection at the last trumpet. One other key theme of the end times and how the rapture is interpreted would also come down to when Jesus does come back, and when the second coming happens and we see Jesus riding out on his white horse in Revelation 19, and he's coming with the host of heaven. Believers in a pre-tribulation or mid-tribulation rapture would see verses like Revelation 19 verse 8 that describes the believers being in heaven and having their robes washed and being in fine linen, as a picture of being washed by the blood of Jesus and being cleansed. And then when you get to Revelation 19 verse 14 that talks about Jesus riding out with his army dressed in fine linen, would see that that's referring to the believers who are already there in heaven. So when Jesus is coming back in the second coming, the believers are already present. In other words, they've been raptured, they've been in heaven with Jesus, and now they're coming with Jesus for the final battle. And they would look at verses like Revelation 20 verse 5 that talk about the first resurrection being about the martyrs who've gone, the people who've lost their lives through the tribulation, being raised because they see the church is already present with Jesus. The challenge to this would come with the post-tribulation view, where they would look at verses like Zechariah 14 verse 5, where it talks about Jesus coming back with his holy ones, with angels. And they would look at Matthew 24:31 that says that after all the events of the end times, where after all the apocalyptic signs, Jesus returns with his angels to gather the believers. And the angels are therefore not the bride of Christ that's referred to in Revelation 21. So believers of the post-tribulation rapture would look at Revelation 19 and see that as Jesus coming with his angels in order to gather the believers for the resurrection. I think to help us maybe get our heads around, I've previously said, I only see one resurrection, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a rapture first. And believers in a pre-tribulation or a mid-tribulation rapture would both hold that there is a difference between the rapture and the resurrection. In other words, when Jesus comes on the clouds, he's not touching down. He's in the clouds, but he's not actually come for a second time. And there's a difference between Jesus coming on the clouds and when he actually touches down on the Mount of Olives, when you get to Revelation 19 and 20 and you see Jesus returning. So holders of a pre-tribulation and a mid-tribulation view would see a distinct difference between the rapture and the resurrection. Whereas people who believe in a post-tribulation rapture would see that the rapture and the resurrection are a simultaneous event. They happen at the same time, where believers are raptured to be with Jesus when he returns at the end, and that the second coming is about him coming to judge and deal with everybody. All three views are based on good biblical interpretations and are made in good faith. And I think I would once again just encourage us to check our hearts and to approach with grace. Whichever view you feel as you study the Bible, you feel most comfortable with, can I encourage you to hold it with an open hand and hold it with grace towards others, because it does depend how you choose to interpret some of these key views on Israel and the church, where the wrath fits versus the effects of sin, and whether Jesus' return is with the church or with the angels. Whichever way it is, it will be the way Jesus wants it to be. And the question for us is, will we be ready?